Hi, been a while since I've done anything about the full moon. Today is July the 29th, and I started actually at 3:33 p.m. How interesting is that? So I'm taking this time because I just feel guided. First of all, I'm writing a book about a lot of this, but I felt really guided. There's an incredibly powerful full moon coming up on August the 9th or 8th, depending on where you live on the planet. And as I looked at the chart for that, I noticed, gosh, a couple of really amazing things happening. So I thought I would try to do a short video. Hopefully, it'll be short. I have lots to say. And once I post it in my newsletter and on my YouTube channel, please feel free to share it if you like. So first, in the order, this particular time has come to be known as Lionsgate or the Lionsgate portal, and it's actually a relatively new idea, uh, or put into modern terms, I guess I should say. And I believe from trying to track it down, it was someone in Australia who came up with the idea from about July the 26th until the middle of August, called this the Lionsgate portal. And I thought I would talk a little bit about how that happened and what it meant in more ancient times before I get to the astrology chart at the end. So it's a combination, really, of Egyptian star lore, mythology, things that happened in more ancient times. But the key at the heart to the idea has to do with, from our perspective, what is the brightest star in the sky, and that is Sirius, what's known as the alpha star in the constellation of Canis Major, the big dog. So we have, as the year turns, our sky moves. And so we have winter stars and we have summer stars. And as we look at the night sky over the year, people over countless millennia probably have drawn star pictures and told their stories and imagined what that would be like and what the influence was. So I have lots of notes in case I forget what I'm saying. So let's see. So what happens as the seasons pass and the stars change is that some of them rise and set over the course of the nighttime, and what are called the circumpolar stars never rise or set. They just circle around the poles in the north of the northern, far north sky or far southern sky. And the bright star Sirius we see in the wintertime. It's part of what's called the winter triangle. And I'm going to see if I can share a picture of that so you can see where it is still invisible right now as it sets in the spring and then becomes visible again in our time. This happens in the middle of August. Back to the idea of Lionsgate. And of course, there are summer stars that we may be familiar with. There's also a summer triangle made up of Vega in the constellation of Lyra, Deneb in the constellation of Cygnus, and Altair in the constellation of Aquila, the eagle. So that's the summer triangle that some of you may be familiar with. So the idea in ancient Egypt is that they paid great attention to the cycles and the rising and setting of the bright star Sirius. And because of precession, because of other things that have happened, that star coincided with the beginning of the new year and coincided actually with the annual flooding of the Nile. And so, just a word about precession right now and that cycle. Sorry, I think that's my phone that just went off. Sorry about that. I thought I put it on silent. So, most of you will know about the astrological ages and that the age of Pisces has just ended. Of course, there's a cusp, and that we are now in what's called the dawning of the age of Aquarius. And that motion is caused, astronomers say, it's simply caused by the gravity of the sun and moon on the Earth. I think it's much more complicated than that in terms of our relationship with other stars or solar systems, stellar systems. But in any case, that is called the precession of the equinox. And the reason for that is it's a very slow motion over approximately 26,000 years of time. And in that cycle, roughly speaking, we don't know, of course, if the motion is consistent over that enormous amount of time. But roughly speaking, that causes our view of the sky. And traditionally, it's been marked at spring equinox in the northern hemisphere. And what star or stars are rising in the east ahead of the sun? And that motion is called heliacal rising, rising before the sun. And right now we're at the cusp of stars, the last stars in the constellation of Pisces and the stars in the constellation of Aquarius. So that's what defines what we call an age. And so thousands of years ago in Egypt, as far ago as 5,000, 6,000 years ago, and this is an important thing to remember. It's a bit technical, hopefully not too confusing, but more than likely, based on my calculations and how this hopefully moves somewhat consistently over time, it would have been the stars of Taurus rising at spring equinox. And therefore, and again, I wasn't there, so I can't for sure know the time, but in precession, it goes backwards. And so we have gone from the age of Pisces, then backwards into the age, excuse me, of Aquarius, and then we'll go into the age of Capricorn. And before the age of Pisces, we were in the age of Aries. So it's a little bit complicated just because of the way the Earth wobbles and makes that move. So it's been said in ancient texts that their new year and the heliacal rising of the star Sirius, they called that star Sopdet, and it was equated with the goddess Isis. But at that time, it still rose, in a sense, in the constellation of Leo, but it was a different time of the year. So for the ancient Egyptians, 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, and they were marking this, that star rose at summer solstice. And when Sirius rose, it was an indication that the Nile was about to flood. So that was their New Year celebration, a celebration of fertility, of renewal. And now, because of precession, the heliacal rising of Sirius, rising before the sun after roughly 70 days of invisibility, happens, this year it happens around the 10th or 11th of August, right toward the end of the sign of Leo, constellation of Leo. So that's a lot of information, I know, but I think it's sort of important to understand what the real meaning is, or what the real meaning might have been to the ancients. As I mentioned, they equated the star we call Sirius, which means burning or scorching in our language, and the Greeks called it, this would have happened thousands of years later, the dog days of summer, because that star then rose at the hottest time, which is doing again now. Where I live in Southwest Colorado, it's supposed to happen around the 10th or 11th of August. And the full moon chart that I will talk about at the end of my remarks today happens, I think I said already, on the 8th or 9th, depending on where you are on Earth, moving around the cycle. So let's see, what did I talked about? The Lionsgate precession. So a little bit about the story of Sirius. As I said, I'm writing a book, I think I said that, about a lot of this material. And what I believe, and not just me, other sources say the same thing. And one of the most interesting things is the Dogon tribe of Mali in Africa also have tremendous knowledge of the star Sirius and its white dwarf companion, long before our scientists even knew it was there. And they described beings that came from that star system, who they called Nomo. And they said the Nomo taught them all their culture, everything that they knew. And that legend or story is also true in ancient Egypt. And years ago, in 1997, I visited South Africa. That's its own whole story, and visited with Credo Mutu, a high priest of the Zulu shaman, who told me the same story about beings from the star system of Sirius who came to Earth, came to South Africa at that time. My book's about their arriving in North Africa, and taught the humans on Earth everything they knew about civilization and so forth. So there's so much in theosophical, metaphysical traditions. Sirius is seen as what's called the central sun. And we're in a very interesting relationship with that star. And the ancient Egyptians knew about it in terms of what we might even call an entrainment. I don't know if that's exactly the right word, but in many traditions, including theosophy, uh, that's the location, if not literally, because no one lives in that star system anymore after the nova of Sirius B, the invisible star, that's a companion star to Sirius A, the brightest star in the sky from our perspective. Not the biggest, not the brightest, but it is from our perspective. The only thing next in line brighter than Sirius is Venus. So the idea is that the Sirius star system is way more advanced and elderly than ours. Our scientists perceive that our universe is about 16 billion years old. Some sources say it's far older. But imagine a culture that could be 1 million years more advanced from us. And in that story, those beings set out to other star systems, and Sirius is relatively close to us, about 8.5 light years away. And our planet is one of the places that they came. Now, there's another whole story about that I'm writing about in the book, about what was once a planet that is now the asteroid belt, and how the Syrians have helped with us. But the ancient Egyptians, and I believe, certainly not the only one, but I believe the culture of Egypt is far, far older, closer to 40,000 years older rather than the 5, 6, 8,000 years that traditional Egyptologists claim. So that's a lot to take in. I think maybe I covered all the notes. Let me see if I can share my screen and show you the one picture. So this is a picture of what's called the winter triangle. And I asked my husband, Ted, for input about my remarks and what I might say. And his encouragement, which I highly agree with, is to go outside and actually look at the stars, but specifically Sirius around this time. And as I said, where I live in Southwest Colorado, it will begin to be visible around the 10th or 11th. So here is Sirius down here, brightest star in the sky. This is called the Winter Triangle. The star is Procyon, the alpha star in the little dog. And here, as you can see, what everybody recognizes is the constellation of Orion. And this is Betelgeuse, the alpha star in the constellation of Orion. And so this helps to identify. And so the idea would be go out and practice before sunrise around the time of the full moon, even as that is setting, maybe around the 9th, the 10th, an hour or so before sunrise, and find the star. It'll still be dark, but it will be rising. And as dawn approaches, it will come up to the horizon before the sun. And that was an incredibly magical, powerful time for ancient Egypt. And it is at the heart of what's meant by the Lionsgate portal, the Lionsgate information, because although Sirius, from the tropical standpoint of the zodiac, is at 14 degrees of Cancer, it will be rising in the sign of Leo. So I know that's all a bit complicated, but I wanted you to see this diagram. So I think that it's important important to realize. Looking at the sky, first of all, I think is one of the most important things we can do. And the Tibetans knew this, the Egyptians knew this, because of all the light that we have and the artificial light that we have now in our culture, we rarely actually go out and engage the stars. And the Tibetans had knowledge, incredible wisdom, that they believed the stars were vastly ancient beings who spent their lives literally on fire so that other beings in other star systems could evolve. So to go out on a dark night and consciously engage with one of these stars is one of the most powerful things we can do. And so remembering that this was a time of great rejoicing in ancient Egypt and great power. And I'll talk in a minute about the chart. By the way, I'm going back to Egypt next March. If any of you are interested in coming along, that should be another powerful experience. But the point, before I talk about the chart, the point I would like to make is that having intention, if you have trouble meditating, just spend some time in silence. To me, it's less about manifesting and declaring your desires that seems to be the popular idea of Lionsgate. To me, it's much more about knowing what has to change or heal or be released in your life and having the courage, a very leonine idea, having the courage to let it go. All right, so for those of you who speak astrology, let's just quickly look at this chart. Oops. So let's see if I can get the right one. Oh, I know why. Forgive me, the technology is beyond me at times. Okay, so for those of you who speak astrology, here is the chart for the full moon. And so you can see, here's the moon up here, and sun's down there. That's the opposition at 17 degrees of Leo. And this happens at my time at 2 in the morning Mountain Time on August the 9th, which is a Saturday. I'm doing this early so people can have a chance to share it, to maybe get together with friends or think about drawing on the energy. For 30 years, I did a full moon meditation because we're taught that we can be a vessel of energy from the higher realms, and we're capable of handling much more of that voltage if we're in a group. But it's okay, you can be by yourself. So that's the full moon opposition. At the same time, is a conjunction between Saturn and Neptune. This could be a whole topic in and of itself. On the positive end, it's building a structure of the highest possible inspiration that we can imagine. On the negative end, it would be subject to delusions, illusions, and falling into addiction. As you'll notice, there's a green line from that conjunction to the planet Mars in Libra, adding more energy there. And let's see, also, there is a conjunction between Venus and Jupiter, who traditionally in astrology are considered to be what are called the benefics. I kind of disagree with that, but what's interesting is Jupiter is at 13.5 degrees of Cancer, and as I think I mentioned earlier, the bright star Sirius is at 14. So Jupiter will be combined, expanding the energy of that star, again, in a very powerful way. Mercury is making a trine to the conjunction, so we might reflect ourselves on what we might want to burn up in a cauldron or put energy into to create a magic potion in our life. So Pluto over here at 2 degrees of Aquarius is opposing Mercury as well. Positive, transforming thoughts. So I'm going over this really quickly. Those of you who, as I said, it'll be recorded. Venus is making what's called a novile aspect to Uranus and Gemini. So not sure in the short run how to interpret that, other than everything in the chart is connected to something. So here's the thing I want to mention, and my highlights are not that great. So there is what's called a grand trine between Uranus here, Pluto, Uranus at 1 Gemini, Pluto at 2 Aquarius, and down here also connecting to Mars at 1 degree of Libra. So you see this triangle I've drawn. Now, the really interesting thing about this chart, because the opposition between Neptune and Saturn pierces the Great Trine, and when you draw the top of that, that aspect is called a kite. And there is a second one between the opposition between Mercury and Pluto on the other side of the Grand Trine, two kites. So somebody, astrologer colleague, uses what he calls positive aspects as blue and negative ones or harder ones as red. And he said this one has far more blue energy than red energy. I think of the kite aspect like the spinnaker sail of a sailboat, which catches the wind from behind. I'm sure you've seen them. They're usually bright colors and have different identifications. So there's a lot to take in. I'm only sharing it. Those of you who understand astrology, just to take a look, you can spend more time imagining or reflecting on it. But the real purpose, as I said, of doing this video is to encourage people to take some time, whether that's in solitary silence, whether that's journaling, whether that's reflecting on what's happening in your life and what needs to change, be released, change structure, where you might need courage to move ahead in some way. It's a very powerful time. And I believe that if we set our intention, to me, like I say, it's not about necessarily manifesting or getting more stuff. It's more about what kind of a world do we want to have and what do we need to change, where our world is filled with more heart. The ancient Egyptians knew and understood what science is only beginning to understand, that it's the heart, symbolically, that is the true seat of wisdom for our consciousness. So that probably took longer than I expected or hoped that it would. But thank you for tuning in. Please like the video if you do, and please share it if you want to, and let me know any questions you might have. And many, many blessings to all of you. So we'll stop the recording.